Good evening and welcome to another episode of Angles and Attitude. Tonight is episode 32, and we are going to call this one the Magic Johnson episode of Angles and Attitudes. Tonight, we are honored to have Emmy Award-winning journalist Rob Johnson to Angles and Attitudes, formerly of ABC Chicago, formerly of CBS Chicago, and now the president of Rob Johnson Communications here in Chicago. Rob, thank you, welcome, and what is going on, young man?
Oh my goodness. John, thank you for having me on. I'm so thrilled to be with you. And it's so funny when you said the Magic Johnsons, because when my son was younger and we would do like a contest or we do like fantasy sports or something, we were always the Magic Johnsons. That's always the name I made it. So,
wow, okay.
So when he told me that it was Magic Johnson, and I was like, oh my gosh, it made me laugh about that with my son because we used to get a big kick out of that.
Oh, that is cool.
He was like, if we were a basketball team, Dad, what would we be called? I'm like, the Magic Johnsons.
The Magic Johnsons. No, but I wanted to tell you that we have every episode is after a famous athlete's number, and it was amazing today when I saw 32
number
come up.
32. Perfect.
Johnson. I was thinking Sandy Koufax, but I want Magic Johnson.
No. Magic Johnson's way better. I'll take that any day.
Listen, I want to start by saying, do you are you born and raised in Missouri, or did you just go to school there as a youngster?
Well, I was born in Fayetteville, Arkansas. My father was in law school at the University of Arkansas. So I was born there. My mom was teaching. I lived there for a year. I moved to St. Louis. My dad worked for Price Waterhouse for several years in St. Louis. He was also a CPA. So as a CPA, and he got his JD. This guy, wow. He had a lot of advanced degrees. And so we lived in St. Louis for 12 years. And then when I was 13, my father he'd been working with Emerson Electric. So he went from Price Waterhouse to Emerson Electric. He took the job as the head of European operations for Emerson Electric in Europe. So I moved to Brussels, Belgium when I was 13 years old, 8th grade. It was the time of my life.
Wow.
The people I met, the traveling I got to do, it's a different world because there really are no rules or laws or whatever. And so it was a most unusual experience growing up there, getting to travel for sports all the time, getting to travel, for a ski trip or for the holidays, for Christmas and New Year's, for Mardi Gras, for Easter. The experience I got traveling, the places I got to see with my friends, I will never forget. It was the best education I have ever gotten in my life.
Wow, incredible. Yeah, I noticed that, did you? And you went, of course, you had to go to school. How long were you out in Belgium when you were doing the schooling there and everything?
I went there for 5 years. We went to an international school, which was 60% American, but they had 60 different nationalities. So they had Brussels American School, which was for the expats, for the military. And then they had International School of Brussels, which is where I went to, which is where civilians went to school. And it's a elite, wonderful, terrific school. It's on a 75-acre campus, and it has a chateau for the admin building. You go up this huge hill in Boisfort, Belgium, and you see this building. Wow. That's just majestic, and that's the admin building. And then you walk on, there's elementary school, high school sort of in the middle school's tucked out back. It was just wonderful, and the people that I met are just second to none. The experience we got to have, our dads all worked for different companies, for American companies primarily.
Rob, was there a different language there? What's the language there?
Yeah, I spoke French proficiently. I'm not going to say fluently, but when you start hearing it enough and you go downtown and, as civilians, we tried not to be sort of typical Americans with, Nikes and jeans and like, the tourist thing. And we really assimilated into European culture, and that's back in the new wave era. So we had funky haircuts and we did weird things,
Yeah,
and
yeah, right, right.
but it was authentic to the time we were in and where we were. And I'm telling you, there was no better time in my life than there. So I went there. I started in 8th grade. I graduated high school there.
Wow.
I was on the volleyball, basketball, and baseball teams. I was the president of the student council. Just the experience, the friends that I made. In fact, one of my oldest friends in the world, his name's Todd Houtman. He works for Eli Lilly in Indianapolis, but he has a place in Paw Paw, Michigan. And last week we went up north to meet my son and some of our other friends at their lake house way up north. And we stopped at Paw Paw, where his family has set up shop for the summers, for years. And I got a
Wow.
chance to see him and his sister and his mother. His mother's 85 years old now, and she was like a second mom to me. And to have her there for the evening was such a treat. But these are friends. I mean, 40 years we've been friends.
Yeah,
And we played baseball together. We played basketball together. And we later in our when I was in college, I was doing an off-campus thing. He was too, and we ran into each other in Washington D.C. for a few months. Then I moved to Chicago in '98, and my wife and I, she wasn't my wife at the time, but she was shortly thereafter, found a condo in the Lakeview area, and it was literally right around the corner from his condo. And so we had about 3 years. So we've been friends for 40 years, but we've kind of caught up with each other at different points in our lives. And it's great to make those friendships.
You talk about the world being small, and just look what happens like that. But I have to tell you, so you're out there in Belgium, in Europe. Does the love of journalism, was it always with you, or when does it kind of kick in?
I got to tell you, I always thought, people say, when I was in high school, what do you want to do? Oh, I want to go into business like my dad, whatever that means. I'm going to do business. And so this is very unusual. I went from Brussels, Belgium to Greencastle, Indiana, DePaul University, small
and
school.
I want to make the correction. It's a lot of people think you went to DePaul. It's
DePaul. Oh no, for years and years, people say DePaul in Chicago, and I'd say no, and they'd go basketball, and I go, well, they have a basketball team, but it's not like DePaul's was. And so after about 500 times like that, I think I finally just started saying, yeah, I went to DePaul, but it was DePaul with a W. And to go from Brussels, which was an international kind of cosmopolitan city, to Greencastle, Indiana, which looked like Back to the Future when they went back to 1955 and the town square and all that. That was it. It was a real culture shock, but I, made a lot of friends there and had a good experience. And but it was an unusual way to go. And coincidentally, there were 3 or 4 other people from Brussels who went to DePaul, which I think is very odd that we would have all ended up there, but we did. And it was a totally different existence than the one that we lived in Brussels.
Oh, sure, for sure. Now, when you're there at DePaul, does the journalism thing start there?
So you were asking that question, and I was sort of transitioning to that. I thought I was going to do business. So I went to DePaul. I took my first econ class with Dr. Gary Lemon, who is a genius professor. And I was like, oh gosh, this isn't going to go well. I don't think I'm going to do. I don't think I'm going to do this. So at about the same time, I realized I wasn't going to do exactly what my father did, and I wasn't going to get all these advanced degrees and whatever the case was. I had a friend that was working the graveyard shift at the radio station, and he's like, "Hey, you want to fill in some night?" I'm like, "Sure." And so I filled in here and there, and then I had it as part of for one semester. I was actually I had a 3 to 6 fill in, not every night, but enough nights where getting up early for class was tough. And so it wasn't great for, a guy with early classes. So I started doing radio, and then I went and I wanted, and they didn't have a TV station at the time. So I immersed myself in radio. I was in the news department. The first story I ever covered, unfortunately, one of the fraternities had a ghetto party and people dressed in blackface. This is back in the 80s. I mean, it was even not cool to do it then, because Jesse Jackson and Al Sharpton come to campus, and they're marching down Locust, and it's "We Shall Overcome" and the whole deal. That was my first news story I ever really covered.
Wow.
And so I ended up being a stringer for the Associated Press. I ended up doing a radio documentary about it, aside from covering the ins and outs of the whole story. And then I ended up winning a Society of Professional Journalists award
I noticed that.
later in the year. And I just had this thing like, oh, do you I guess you win awards for every time you do a story, which is not the case, as I came to find out. But it was such an important story to tell at that time. And DePaul was so overwhelmingly white at the time, and there was this, sort of insensitivity, and it really opened our eyes. And I was having to walk in the fraternity that was involved, and I knew the president because he was my RA my first week on campus. And it was a great experience, like having to walk in, through the gauntlet, and like go interview somebody and try to do a fair job, and knowing that you're upsetting people. And so that was, I learned that very well. And so I worked in the news department for quite a while at WGRE FM 91.5, the Sound Alternative.
Right.
And then I started dabbling in sports, and I did play-by-play for football and basketball. So a lot of my weekends, as I got a little bit older, were taken up with, driving, a university vehicle with all the
Sure.
radio equipment, the MARTA, I think it was called the MART, anyway, and to like Hope College or to Oberlin or to, some of these small Division III places, and doing football or basketball or whatever the case was. So I really enjoyed that. And then I started doing morning DJing, which is a totally different skill set. And I would come up with
Sure.
comedy bits with one of my fraternity brothers
A lot
on
of
a regular
improv,
basis.
yeah.
A lot of improv, a
Oh,
lot
yeah.
of topical, but a lot of topical. Hey, the administration, they're a bunch of whats and that sort of thing. And then promotion. So I took advantage of everything I could do and radio. And the entire time I was there, they were building a media center. And the semester after I left, they opened it. Radio, newspaper, television, they had it all. And it was open right after I left, which I was like, oh my gosh. And I was watching this palace be built, and it was very frustrating. But so I parlayed the radio experience into, my parents had moved back from Belgium, and they live in Little Rock, Arkansas to this day. My mom and dad are from the South, so they wanted to move closer to
Right.
home. So my dad then worked for Stevens Incorporated, one of the largest off Wall Street investment banking firms around, and he got a Series 7. So this guy, I'm telling you, my dad did everything.
Wow.
And
Well-rounded person.
oh my gosh, no kidding. And so I did a couple of internships at TV stations in Little Rock. At DePaul, they had what was called a winter term. So January, you could be off campus and you could stay at home and you could do an internship. And so I did a couple of those. And then my junior year, I went to an off-campus program through American University in Washington, D.C. And 3 days a week, it was my professor. Her name was Barbara Diggs Brown, and she would have us go meet at 10 o'clock. We're going to Congressman Leland's office. 1 o'clock, break for lunch. We're going to ABC in Washington. We're going to talk to Ted Koppel. That was my Monday through Wednesday.
Wow.
And then Thursday and Friday, I worked at CNN in Washington.
I saw you had an internship there at CNN. Yes.
Oh my gosh, what an experience that was. And that was back in the salad days. I mean, this isn't the big international consortium that CNN is now. I mean, I think a lot of it was done with, duct tape and chicken wire. But they had a Washington bureau, and it was just straight news. So it was an anchor reading the news, deadlines every hour, people chain smoking in the newsroom and cursing and screaming and that sort of thing. So we all did 2-week rotations. I started in the newsroom, and probably because I didn't cry or, get emotional or whatever when they would scream and yell at me, I did my 2-week rotation in the newsroom, and then I went and I did my first day in research clipping. This is in the old days where you clipped articles. You didn't have Google, you clipped articles and that sort of thing. Halfway through the day, the internship coordinator came to me and said, "You've got to get back in the newsroom." I'm like, "Why?" They said, "Some of these kids can't handle it. They're freaking out because these were all like journalists, veteran journalists on deadline every hour, and they were screaming and yelling and cursing. And I ran teleprompter. I ran at some point, I ran the camera. I remember a couple of times running the camera for Bernard Shaw, the incredible Bernard Shaw. And I remember, my first duty when I got there in the morning was to hand out all the papers. It would be Bernard Shaw. He wants the Tribune. He wants the Wall Street Journal. He wants this, whatever. And I would go by before they got there, and I would make sure they all had their newspapers. And I would always try to chat him up a little bit because he was the gold standard at CNN for so many years.
Oh, for sure.
But I also learned that was such a great experience about how to treat people when you're the man, when you're the guy, or the woman, or whatever the case is. I had a lot of anchors whose names you won't remember, you won't know, who were complete jerks and didn't treat people the right way, treat up and comers, like an intern, the right way. And
so they would look down upon you, basically.
They look down upon you. They just treat you like the hired help. Bernard Shaw was always such a gentleman and was always such a professional. And for as busy as that man was, he always had time for me, and I just have such great admiration. People ask me, who is one of your journalism heroes? I mean, I'm like, you got to go with like Peter Jennings, Tom Brokaw. I got to know a little bit at a charity event one time, and Bernard Shaw. And so I have a quick couple stories that I think you'll like. The first one was Bernard Shaw. This was years ago at CBS, and we were doing Black History Month. And normally it was the African-American journalist that would do little vignettes, 30 seconds, about some issue related to them. This one happened to be people that made an impact on you. And they were like, hey, everybody's involved. I'm like, even me? Like, they're like, hey, Rob, we want you to do, is there an African-American that was influential, has been influential in your career? I'm like, oh my gosh, Bernard Shaw. So I did a 30-second vignette talking about what a great guy Bernard Shaw was. And one day I got a phone call at CBS, and I can't even emulate it because the guy had pipes that went on for days. It was like, hello, Rob Johnson. And I'm like, yes. He's like, this is Bernard Shaw. And I'm like, what? And then he's already retired, right? So he's like, I hear you're saying very nice things about me on the airways in Chicago. And I'm like, well, you're my hero. And I explained, I said, there's 40 interns that went through there every year. I don't expect you to remember who I was, but you made a huge impact on my career. And he's like, could you send me that tape? And I'm like, well, of course I'll send you that tape.
Oh, wow.
So I have it. So my thing is, Bernard Shaw is probably mid 70s or 80 now. I don't know. But I've got him in my phone. Like I could call him if I wanted to. I got Bernard Shaw.
I mean, and Shaw is one of your earliest mentors, right?
Yeah, for sure he was. And he didn't even really know that he was, other than he was a really cool guy. And he treated me with respect and dignity, even though I was only a 21-year-old intern. But that to me was like, okay, I'm going to take that I'm going to take that. That's going to be part of my career. And then that guy over there that's being a jerk, I'm not going to be that guy. So you kind of take this. So my other quick story, if I can tell a Tom Brokaw story, I was emceeing a young professionals organization, young presidents organization event. And I don't know if you know anything about them, but it's all, younger presidents of companies and this and that, and everything they do is completely over the top. This happened to be, we were in a hangar at the old Milwaukee Airport, whatever it's called now, Chicago Executive Airport.
Yeah, the first edition or the first, whatever.
Yeah, but we know it as Milwaukee, right? So that airport, and they had all these private jets, and you could sit in them, and it was very cool. And then they had luxury automobiles. They had Ferraris and Lamborghinis, and you could test drive them, for like a couple of minutes and everything. So it was very cool. And they had Tom Brokaw as the guest speaker. And so they were going to have me talk, then they were going to have Tom talk, but Tom showed up a little bit late. And so the schedule got kind of thrown off. And John Stromberg, who's a good friend of mine, an old DePaul buddy of mine who was running this YPO event, said, hey, Rob, do you mind? We're not only going to have time for Tom, but would you do Q&A with Tom? I'm like, oh, of course I would. So Tom walks in, and I didn't know what to expect. I heard, he doesn't suffer fools very well. That's fine. And he walks in, and I said, Mr. Brokaw, my name's Rob Johnson. I anchor the news at CBS. He goes, I know who you are. And I'm like, what? You know who I am? I'm on TV every night, three times a night. most people, if they're consuming that, probably know who I am. But the fact that Tom Brokaw knew who I was, oh my goodness. And this was only probably 7, 8, 9 years ago. I can't remember. It wasn't that long ago. But Tom Brokaw's like, I know who you are. And I was just, it was such a kick. And so my wife and I had a picture with him, and I was doing Q&A with him in the hangar at Milwaukee. And it was just the time of my life. It couldn't have been better. I mean, but those are two guys that had a huge impact on me growing up and were heroes of mine. And then the late Peter Jennings, who I didn't know, who was just the smoothest dude on TV ever.
The classic journalists. I mean,
yeah.
And what memories you have in those stories. I have to tell you, you start off, of course, with a few early stations out in Arkansas, KLB, and of course, KLFY and all that. And then, of course, you make the move to Chi-Town, correct? After you.
Yeah, no. So I went. My early days were covering Louisiana politics, in small stations there. So I covered David Duke, who is the former Grand Wizard of the Ku Klux Klan, who was trying to in 1990. He said all welfare mothers should have Norplant, the birth control device, implanted in their arms. And everybody's like, what? Like, what?
Oh.
And then he ends up running for governor against Edwin Edwards, who went to federal prison for corruption. And he was the coolest, greatest guy. I mean, like, he didn't drink, he didn't smoke, but he was a notorious womanizer. And he was very corrupt. But a lot of the politicians in Louisiana were at the time. And then they're running against Buddy Roemer, who was Harvard educated, who had this sort of, really smart guy, but a little bit of arrogance about him. They all ran for governor in 91 or 2. I can't remember what year it was. And I was covering it as a young journalist. And Buddy Roemer, the incumbent, didn't make the runoff. It was David Duke against Edwin Edwards. It was the former Grand Wizard of the KKK against one of the most corrupt politicians ever. And Edwards actually had bumper stickers that said, "Vote for the crook. It's important." And so it was for a young person, there was no education I could have gotten that was better than that. It was just phenomenal. And I remember David Duke didn't have 2 nickels to rub together. He didn't raise money because he got free earned media all the time. He would say these ridiculous things, and we would all be like, "Oh my God, can you believe what David Duke said today?" And we would go to these events back in the early 90s, and they would be literally passing the hat. I'm sure to get by FEC rules or whatever, $20 here, $10 here, $5 here, whatever. And as we would cover these events, people would be spitting on us. They would be pouring beer on us. They would be cursing at us. And I just thought the tremendous irony was, if it was not for me at my station and all these other people at their stations or their newspapers or their radio stations, you wouldn't know who David Duke was, because we give him free pub all the time, because the stuff that he said was like, what? So there was tremendous irony in getting beer tossed on you and getting spat upon. But you can't. There's no school you can go to. There's no book you can read. There's nothing you can do that really, can take the place of that. And then to cover various hurricanes in Louisiana was something that was, what a way to cut your teeth, covering hurricanes and learning all about that. And, when Ida went ashore at the end of August, it was 16 years to the day that Hurricane Katrina hit. And I remember being at ABC.
And you were part of that in 05.
Yeah. And Chuck Gowdy went and covered it when it was, offshore, coming ashore, moving from Mississippi to Louisiana. But, I'm telling you, 8 days of 20-hour days in those conditions, it'll wear down a man or a woman. It will. And after like probably 8 or 10 days, Chuck was like, all right, Chuck's coming home. Rob, you're going down there. You used to work down there. And it was the most horrifying story I ever covered.
And this was your Channel 7 days, correct?
This is my Channel 7 days. So I was up in Chicago, and I'm like, hey, man, I used to work in Louisiana. I know that area real well. You should send me down there. So after Chuck came back, they sent me down there, and I worked 8 or 10 days down there in very, very difficult circumstances. And I have memories that, I think I probably had a little PTSD from the things that I saw, and it took a while to sort of decompress. Fortunately, right when I got back, I had vacation coming, and I went on vacation with my wife and my newborn son at the time. And but when Ida hit, And I realized it was 16 years to the day that Katrina hit, and it hit in a little different area, a little different location. The levees back then were not as good as they are now. They breached, and that's what caused all the flooding and all the mayhem. And it was just a disaster. But
Wow.
to cover that story that's so important, and then to see Ida hit and to realize that it wreaked tremendous havoc, but you see the people of Louisiana had learned from their mistakes, and the levees were stronger and more fortified, and it wasn't as bad as Katrina was, made my heart, it did my heart good. At the same time, I felt like I had a little flashbacks, like, oh my God, 16 years to the day.
Right, and I think you even covered Andrew too. I mean, not to.
I did. I covered Hurricane Andrew in 1992.
I remember that.
That was unbelievable. It's, there's something weird about, I'm working in Lafayette, Louisiana at the time, and it's weird to watch cars leave town bumper to bumper 5 miles an hour trying to get out of town, and there's only one vehicle going in. It's the news van. Boom, 40, 50 miles an hour going into to where mayhem is going to strike.
Incident.
It's just a weird thing.
Yeah.
But Hurricane Andrew was it was such an important story to tell and to cover those hurricanes, because it really, I mean, that's where you earn your money. When you have to think on your feet, when you have to be resourceful, when you have to learn little nuances about doing live shots around the corner from where the wind is really howling, so that you don't lose your equipment, you don't lose your life, things of that nature. That's when it really counts.
I have to ask you, between the two stations here in Chicago, ABC and of course CBS, big differences?
Oh yeah, big differences.
Listen, going from the one, of course, you left them in 2006 ABC to go now to this long run with CBS.
Yeah, well, I mean, CBS had problems for years. And then, ABC, when I went to work there as a weekend anchor, and the great thing about ABC, it's not really the case anymore because they've had enough people retire or move on or whatever the case is. But really, when I was there, when you started in a job, you weren't going anywhere. Nobody was leaving. They had a history of overwhelming success, which got very frustrating for a young guy like me who did weekends for 8 years. But then I realized, the guy before me, Jim Rosenfield, did it for 9 years. And the guy before him did it for 8 more years. They hadn't promoted a guy from weekend anchor in 25 years at least.
Wow.
So you want to talk about, I didn't feel like there was any upward mobility. So Joe Ahern, who had great success at ABC here in Chicago and elsewhere, took over CBS and hired me. And it was to go be the main guy at a pretty young age was something that was appealing to me, understanding that the station wasn't as successful and wasn't as strong as what ABC was. But I'm proud of the work that we did there. And Joe Ahern ends up leaving, and then they bring in Bruno Cohen, who's one of the greatest general managers I ever worked for, worked at CNBC and various other places, and he was a no-nonsense guy. And I remember him taking over at the end of 2008 when things were going really bad. The recession was very prevalent at the time,
big
right?
Turn in the industry.
And he starts with, we went to dinner one night with all the anchors, and he goes, "You're gonna be stunned at how much less money you all are gonna be making." And we're like, "Well, what an intro that is. I'm gonna hate this guy." Well, let me tell you, it was all hands on deck. He got rid of some of the programming things that I liked to do, but we were totally focused on news. And he protected me. He protected me from all of the outside extraneous noise. And people forget this, and it really bothers me that they forget this. But there was a point in time when Bruno took over, and it was a 3-year run where we got, year to year, our ratings grew. And at one point, we were right behind ABC. So much so that people used to, fellow journalists, colleagues would say, see me in public, like, "Oh, you're at CBS, whatever." And it got to be the point where they go, "Oh my gosh, you guys are killing it." And I was doing a single anchor show for a while. And then at some point, the corporate bosses decided, "Oh, we better cool that off. Why would we want to be good?" I don't know. I can't speak for them.
I have to read something to you that
Yeah.
is written to you from Mr. Cohen, and it's
Okay.
complimentary.
Okay.
Rob was unfailingly committed to his role as a journalist, newscaster, and a representative of the station. He maintained high standards, embraced challenges, and with enormous stresses of his role, Rob was appreciated for the quality of his work and the support he extended to his colleagues. He was considerably personable, approachable, energetic, with a good sense of humor. Rob, that right there, in a nutshell, tells me what you just said. This is why these ratings were good. This is why you
Yep.
guys were bad. It's your demeanor again,
Oh,
and
thank you.
Cohen says that.
He was such
Professional.
he was such a great mentor. He was such a great leader. And when he left, I knew he was going to leave because they needed him to go fix another station. He was a fixer. So he
Sure.
fixed CBS here, then he left, and it hasn't been going in the right direction since. But he was such a great boss. And yes, he cut my salary more than anybody ever did. It was still a great living, don't get me wrong. And I would tell people, I should hate that guy. He cut my salary so much. You just couldn't sustain those big salaries given what had happened after the recession. And he made the right business decisions, but he put me in a position to succeed. And when bosses do that, and in TV, not a lot of them do, I have unfailing admiration for him.
I have to tell you, we've had a few of your colleagues on here that are in the city. Jackie Bang and Mark Giangreco have been on the show. Do you feel that the news now, the way it's presented, is becoming archaic, the way they told me?
I think the business model is because every station says we're a digital station, and they're trying to figure out how to monetize digital, and they're struggling to do it. But the days of 50, and I mean, back in the glory days, 50-60% profit margins were the norm. And it was obscene how much money these TV stations were making. And then, the recession hits, and then you're making 30 to 40, and then 30 to 20 and 20. And so the thing is, I feel like a lot of times people are sort of like, we can't turn our back on the old model because it's the only one that generated real revenue. But I think a lot of these stations struggle now with how can we be a source for digital news? How can we compete with all these websites and all these other platforms for audience? And that's what they're doing. And that's why I think the business is heading in the wrong direction, because I think the pie has been split up so much now that it's a difficult way to go. And honestly, covering bad news all the time, I don't miss it. I don't really watch the news that much, which it sounds like, oh, biting the hand that fed him. So I know that's not great form, but the local news is at its best. And I think, I was not in the business when COVID hit, but they were a source again. They were relevant again. They were like, oh my gosh, what's going on in my community? And so I think there was a little bit of a renaissance, but I'm not sure they were able to monetize it. And that's a real challenge for that business. I think that business, even the strong stations now, ABC has been, number one with a bullet for years. And now they're facing the realities that a lot of these other stations faced years ago when they had to downsize and that sort of thing. So now, Windy City Live with Ryan Cheverini, who's a friend of mine, gets whacked. And all these people that work 10 years on a local entertainment show. I mean, so ABC's facing the realities that the other stations, I think, faced years ago, but ABC didn't have to because they were so strong. And now I think the realities of the revenue piece, have come to bear upon them too. And John Eidler is an old friend of mine. He's a GM there, smart guy. So I wish everybody well, but I know it's not easy.
Rob, I got to tell you, if you talk to the millennial or the gentleman who's 80 years old, he just said what you said too. I run into people every day. Did you watch the news last night? John, I don't watch the news anymore. Yeah. No. So, and again, there, I want to touch a little bit base your career. Of course, we could stay here 4 hours. I loved your career, and I still love talking about you.
Thank you.
A little bit, Rob, about this Rob Johnson Communications before we sign off here. This is fantastic. What you're doing with this about executives, the imaging and the branching with communications, because communications. I love your slogan. Communications is no game.
It's no game. And I came up with that tagline before COVID hit. And what I would tell people, so when I started when I realized that I might want to try something different, I might want to pivot, I might not want to limp my way into retirement and TV and be less and less and less and less relevant. I was really intrigued by different projects and working for different people and doing that sort of thing. It's a real shock to the system, though, to be a W-2 guy your whole life, and then all of a sudden you're a K-1 and 1099 and W-9 guy, and you're hustling and things of that nature. So it's, that's real. That, building your business is not easy. Nobody said it would be, and certainly building your business and then having COVID hit. I mean, who can predict that? I mean, that's that's crazy. So when I was before I really was getting clients, what I would tell people is, I would say, listen, your company, you spend all day trying to figure out how to put out those fires, right? And I'd say, guess who was responsible for starting those all those years? And everybody's eyes would go, oh yeah, like, yeah, okay, I get it. Now I don't have to tell that story anymore because I actually have clients that I've been working for, and I do everything from one of my best clients is a mid-cap financial services firm here in Chicago, and I've been working with them for 2 years. They've been unbelievable, but I started off helping them with a rebrand and marketing, and then we went to go teach all the different sectors of the business, the brand story. Then COVID hits, then it's like, what am I going to do? And so I'm like, virtual presentation training. You still got to do your business like this.
Right.
You just don't get to go fly to a boardroom in San Francisco, make your pitch, wine and dine them, and catch the plane back. You've got a lot different ways of trying to win that business, and so I really focused on that. And so I've helped them with everything from producing town hall and shareholder meetings to helping their C-suite folks and sales teams with presentation training, helping some of their mid-level executives with sort of coaching and that sort of thing. So that's been terrific. So that whole virtual presentation training thing was very important. And now I'm doing things like I'm getting ready to start a project for one of the local unions and helping them run their YouTube channel and create content and work with a production team and do that sort of thing. And another group that is a client of mine, we're going to start work on the changing cybersecurity laws and what you need to know as a company and how you might be held to account for what you do to try to make strides in cybersecurity. So there's some, but they all relate to, I'm not changing, they all relate to communications. They all relate to how you communicate. And when everybody started working remotely, communicating with your employees was never more important because everybody used to see you in the hallway, or they'd see you at the water cooler or the coffee machine or whatever. And now you don't have that. And how do you communicate with people internally to give them, as much information as you're going to give them? And then your business is transforming because of COVID. How are you going to communicate that externally to your stakeholders, to your customers, your clients? It could be the board, it could be the public and media. I always do media/public because the media is the conduit for the public. That's how they develop their opinions a lot of times. So I've really enjoyed it. And I feel like it's really starting to take shape. I started my own podcast, Can You Hear Me? So I have my own communications-based podcast with Eileen Rochford, who's the CEO of the Harbinger Group, which is a strategy and marketing and PR group here in Chicago. And so she and I co-host it, come up with the ideas, get guests when the times call for it. And she just recently got a nice note from one of the people that track podcasts, and they're like, "Hey, you guys are doing really well on Apple," and we're like 8 episodes in. So I'm really encouraged by that. And you can appreciate that, right? I mean,
for sure.
There's podcasts everywhere.
Your episode today of going back to the office. Are we ready to go back to the office? And again, Rob, the way you put it, I mean, especially somebody like me, my business was affected huge. My father started a travel agency over 55 years ago. And again, now I have to be this 24/7 guy, constantly communicating with the public because the internet does not communicate with the public. So I've had to pivot and make myself this guy that is one-on-one and through any form of communication like you're doing.
And when you're a business owner, you don't have, the choice. You have to sit there and figure out, okay, I'm pivoting, but where is the work? Where are the opportunities and that sort of thing? And I also have had the opportunity to be a guest host on WLSAM 890 from time to time.
You're replacing John Howell some days, I know.
No. Big John is so nice to let me fill in, and I appreciate it.
Yeah, I mean.
but it's nice because they allow me to do a show that is authentic to me. They're not like, hey, go in there and speak conservatism to people. I'm like, that's not, I was a fence straddler in television for almost 30 years. So I call them like I see them. If the Democrats do something stupid, I'm like, that was stupid. The Republicans do something, I'm going to call them like I see them. And to their credit, the program director, Stephanie Tishner, has been terrific. She's like, no, do what's authentic to you. And that's kind of how Big John's show is as well. So it kind of fits for me to do a show that is unique to me. I'm not as much of a political animal as John is, so I don't probably cover as many political stories as he does, even though I love politics. But I'll cover a lot more sort of issue-based, that sort of thing. So that's been a great outlet for me as well, to fill in from time to time and to get to really work on that part of communication, because I did radio in college, as I mentioned, but I didn't, haven't done it regularly for years. So that's it definitely challenges a different part of your brain.
For sure. Well, listen, we could be on here for 2-3 hours, as you know.
This has been great, man. Oh, I love it.
Your career has been something. I have to say one thing before I close it off to you. I want to congratulate your son, Jaden, on the Maine playing.
Oh, thank you.
But we're going to talk hockey, because I'm going to have you back on here one day.
Oh yeah, listen, we could talk more about this for 2 or 3 hours. I could talk more about the hockey thing for 2 or 3 hours, but he got drafted in juniors by the Green Bay Gamblers. He's not playing for him this year. We hope that he may have the opportunity to next year. And then in 2 or 3 years, he's going to go play at University of Maine for this coach, Ben Barr, who's a rock star. He's been successful as an assistant at every place he's been.
At every level.
And he really loves Jaden, and we were just thrilled. So he made a commitment in August to play Division I hockey at University of Maine, the Black Bears. So I'm super proud of him, and I'm super proud of my wife, Stacy. She's awesome. She's so supportive, and just, this has been a big transition too, going from TV to going to, what do you do? You're communications consulting. Like, it's totally different. But our family's doing our best, and I know a lot of families out there are trying to find their way as well, and we're amongst them.
Exactly. And the reason why I wanted to bring up Jane, I'm a big hockey guy here in the state of Illinois.
Oh, it's great.
But I have to tell you, Rob, this tonight for me, I mean, when I got the call from you that you wanted to come on Angles and Attitudes, this is great. I mean, I don't know how to tell you, but I have to tell you, for me, for that local guy who watched you for so many years, I grew up, I went to Loyola, went to study journalism, and I have to tell you, you're a throwback to me, like a Dan Rather.
Oh, thank you. Thank you.
Walter Cronkite, Jennings, Brokaw, people like that. I mean, you remind me, your demeanor. And I listen, I am jealous of one thing, not only the looks and the voice, but the voice is incredible. But I have to tell you, I'm going to use a line. Whatever you're doing now with the Rob Johnson Communications, and how you presented yourself over the years on the channels that I saw, of course, ABC and CBS. I'm going to take a line from somebody that you remember, Carol Fowler. Rob Johnson, you're a proven winner. And that's how I would like to end this tonight. You are a proven winner, Rob, and whatever you do, Robert, you've done well. And you've got to come back to Angles and Attitudes. This was just a piece of the iceberg here tonight. Hey,
man, I'll come back anytime. It was so much fun talking with you, John, and just talking about the old days and what I'm doing, what I did and what I'm doing now. And if you want me to come back and talk hockey, then I can bore you with that for 45 minutes. I'd love to.
Let's do it. But no, Rob, thank you so much. Thanks. I did meet Jaden, give him the best of luck, and say hi to Stacy for me. This was fantastic.
It was. Thank you for the opportunity. It was great being on with you, and I can't thank you enough. It was.